The world of sporting optics is probably bigger right now than it's ever been. You've got binoculars, riflescopes, spotting scopes, and thermal optics. And within those broad categories are thriving subcategories with specialty products designed for super specific tasks. So, if you're a little overwhelmed by the current optics market, we're here to help. I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and today on the podcast, I'm interviewing hunting and optics editor Andrew McKean, who just finished this year's annual optics test. McKean has been reviewing optics every year for decades. And it's no exaggeration to say that he's one of the most experienced and most respected writers in outdoor media. Here's his take on the market trends happening right now, plus some recommendations for anyone looking to buy a new scope, binocular, or thermal this year. All right, Andrew, before you take us into all the new interesting stuff in the optics world, you just got done testing all of the new optics on the market. Will you first talk to us about the history of optics testing at Outdoor Life? Because this goes back to before I even started working at Outdoor Life. So give us some context for, how the optics test kind of came to be and why we test optics the way that we do.
Oh, happily. This actually predates my association with Outdoor Life. In fact, I came to Outdoor Life as an invitee to an optics test 25 years ago.
Oh.
And at that time, the optics test was fairly established already. There had been a couple before I got involved with it. And what's interesting is in these early days, I think this has been a through line, it's one of our keystone tests. In the old days, we had the gun and optics tests combined. Now
Right.
we've separated them because they're just both of them are such monsters. We had the fishing tackle test. We had the bow test, and those were sort of like the four, and they still are in a lot of ways. These are sort of our marquee tests. And the thing I love about your question is there's been a lot of change and a lot of variation. We've changed up a lot of our methodologies and the way we've even cast for submissions. But there still are some things that we've been doing for 25 years. And that is we've tried to have half the test be objective, repeatable, empirical, measurable qualities, and the other half being subjective evaluations. And I've taken a lot of flack for that over the years from the industry about people asking us to justify our test results. And I think it's really fair because honestly, that's the way when I pick up a piece of gear that I evaluate it. I want to know what its specs are and how I can expect them to live up to what is known about them. But there is so much, especially of optics in terms of the handling, the ergonomics, the way a binocular fits my face, or, a rifle scope reticle performs, that are kind of unknowable until you get behind them and experience them for yourselves. And so what I've tried to do over the years is convene a platoon of testers that brings perspectives from the whole sort of world of use cases. So a precision shooter, a hunting guide, a bird watcher, my dumbass buddy who's just got a critique for everything because he's picky. I want that person on our test team because they don't necessarily take what marketers tell you is the truth. They want to find out for themselves. There's a real through line of Missouri in our optics test. You got to show me. And I like that. So you never quite know what you're going to get out of it, but I think the consistency has been, we do a low light test. We do a resolution test. We do a very rigorous evaluation of optical aberrations. And that's something that we've been doing since old Bill McRae, who was the original optics editor for Outdoor Life, invented this test methodology. We've added so many other things to it too. We now do rifle scope tracking, and we do, now we got thermals in the mix. We've got so much more, but the bones of the test are pretty well established.
Yeah, that's really cool that it has that amount of history attached to it. Going to this year's optics test, will you walk us through what you did, where you were at, what you did, kind of the categories of optics that you reviewed this year?
Yeah. So for the past couple of years, we have returned to the Boone and Crockett Club's ranch It's in Montana. It's right on the Rocky Mountain front. So the whole Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, the biggest contiguous wilderness in the lower 48, is literally right out the door of this place. We're glassing, well, last year, grizzly bears. We didn't see any bears this year, but elk and moose and a lot of deer and a lot of just big, handsome country. It's been a good place because there's a house where we can basically spread out and just sort of be ourselves. We've got kind of the run of the place. And there's an associated rifle range with it too, which is really important for all the shooting that we do for the rifle scopes. Every year we shake up the categories just a little bit. So the standards are binoculars, rifle scopes, and more on that in a second, spotting scopes in terms of the traditional daylight optics. And then, as I mentioned, we've brought thermals into the mix. The interesting thing about thermals is they're not daylight, they're electronic, but they really are devices to help us see our world, just as daylight optics have been for, really centuries of humans. And so it's a pretty good fit, although the methodologies are wildly different for thermals, as you might guess. But this year we actually had some subcategories within those bigger categories. So I noticed at SHOT Show this year, maybe slightly afterwards, a lot of energy around new binoculars that are the big, like 15 by 56, the big, like tripod mounted large frame binoculars that, traditionally been used for like Coues deer hunting or for like both eyes open glassing, where you want to spend a long time behind your binocular, really picking apart landscapes. There were so many of them on the market. I thought that would be a fun one to put a head-to-head test. We had 9 of them this year.
Wow.
Most of them are new. I think 7 are new for the year. 2 were remarkable sort of heritage products that we invited to the test. But that was really cool to see, how they performed as a class. The other thing that I started noticing is on the spotting scope line. The interesting thing with spotting scopes is they're expensive to build. Once you have one, you're really not in the market for another one.
Right.
Next year, you tend to have them and you tend to keep them. And so there's just not a lot of energy in that market segment. Consequently, brands don't really have a new spotting scope every year. But what I noticed this year is there's product line extensions with companies having an existing spotting scope, but this year they've got an interchangeable reticle or an eyepiece with a reticle in it. So I think we had 7 or 8 of these spotting scopes with reticles that we're calling range-ready spotting scopes. And I think it's a pretty interesting new category. On rifle scopes, we still have what I call the versatile rifle scope category. It's basically your hunting scope. But LPVOs, the low power variable optic, think about like AR scopes, like the 1 to 6 by 24, the little low power kind of tactical rifle scope has been kind of a new category of rifle scopes. And I thought it was going to be a one and done after the last couple of years, but oh no. I think we had 12 brand new LPVOs this year. The one category I saw cooling in our traditional sort of daylight optics world are precision rifle scopes. We really didn't have, with one exception, we had a $4,500 Collis from Austria that is a monster of a precision scope. But pretty much else is a product line extension. So it's like maybe a new configuration for an existing scope that's out there. And I think the dynamic for that is similar to spotters. Like once you have a precision scope and you settle on it, you know how to shoot it, you're happy with it, you're not necessarily in the market for a new one every year. So that's a category. I think maybe next year we'll see more just because there's a maybe every other year introduction frequency on that. But those were the big ones. We can talk about thermals in a second.
Yeah, we're going to talk about thermals for sure, but let's save that for the second half because I think they kind of deserve their own. They deserve their own half of the conversation. But maybe let's start with binoculars. And what I'm going to ask you to do is just give us the headline for the category, and then maybe pick a couple like remarkable products out of the category that you think people should just kind of know about.
Yeah, that's a good way to break it down. If I hesitate a little bit, it's because my mind is still sort of like numb from all of the optics that we have handled over the past week and change. And when I come home, like, I say, see you later to my testers, and, they leave with like bleary eyes and headaches, but I bring all these optics home and now I got to write about them.
Right.
So they don't really leave my orbit for a while. But I like the way you've sort of like framed it, because it's really easy to get into the weeds of these categories and like, talk about like the granularity of them. But I do think the trends are worth noting. And so binoculars, I think there's a couple that are really kind of worth highlighting. One, and Alex, you and I have talked about this before, like to me, one of the really interesting trends of this optics world is the integration of electronics and optics. SIG they even call themselves an electro-optics company. They probably have the most sort of mature product line that combines circuitry and glass. What was really interesting to me this year is like, don't write the obituary for premium, very expensive, heirloom quality binoculars. So they have no electronics in them at all. They're basically, their value proposition is extremely bright, extremely good glass that they sell for a lot of money. So I call it the super premium. What we had this year was Swarovski has got product line extensions from its NL Pure line. I think that line came out about 3 years ago with 32 and 42 millimeter frames. This year, bigger is better. They have a 10 by 52 and a 14 by 52.
Oh my gosh.
They retail for about $3,500, but they are stunning. I mean, not to be a shill for Swarovski, but it just felt like I was honored to hold those binoculars. Like they're so beautiful, and they're $3,500 or, they ought to be for that price, but that was pretty cool. Zeiss has a brand new product family out. It's actually embargoed until last month, so I can't talk about them yet, but you'll see us talk about them in detail when we can. And also in that premium line, Vortex has really filled out its Razor UHD line. So they started with the 10 by 42s and then the bigger, the 15 by 56 and even larger. But this year they've got a 32 millimeter, so a 8 by 32 and a 40 and a 10 by 32, smaller framed, really nice. Like for me, that's a great bow hunting binocular. I can handle it with one hand. It's got really nice grippy open barrels. Also pricey, $2,100 retail, or what's called MAP, or minimum advertised price of $1,450. So I mean, they're pricey, but they're beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's on the upper aspirational end of binoculars. But what is exciting for me is also the pretty rich entries from entry-level binoculars. So there's a brand new family from Bushnell called the R5 for about $200. It's just a great knockabout binocular. Leupold's got its brand new family. It's called, get ready for this because it's a mouthful, the BX4 Pro Guide HD Gen 2. Just rolls off the tongue. That has interchangeable eye cups, which is kind of cool. Like optically, there's not a ton new, but the interchangeable eye cups, they ship with 3 different pairs that you can change out in the field as you need to. And I think that's a good and important innovation. And then there's a brand new, I think it's about $400 retail from GPO called the Passion SD. Do you want to guess what SD stands for?
I am scared to. So maybe just tell me.
So we've got HD, which is high definition. I have no idea what that means. There's UHD, which is ultra high definition. Again, I have no idea. That does not have any sort of meaning in the real world of glass technology. But GPO has now furthered that. SD glass is called substantial definition.
What?
What the hell does that mean? I don't know.
Is it better than?
Yeah, it was fun.
Okay.
I mean, it's substantially better than no designation.
I guess so.
So that's kind of news in the binocular world, I'd say, from sort of both ends of the price and performance spectrum.
Yeah. How about riflescopes? What's going on there? Is it are we seeing any shake up in electro-optics, or are we still kind of riding this trend of traditional, really nice glass, really useful?
That's a very, very good question. I actually expected to see a lot more integration of electronics this year. Last year we saw Burris's Veracity PH, which has got an electronic heads-up display on the turret. So basically you can turn the turret to a known yardage and it will show you the aiming prescription for that yardage based on your elevation dial. Really smart, really interesting. There's actually a brand new version of that in this year's test. Revic, which is the optics side of Gunworks, the long-range shooting school in Cody, Wyoming's got a crazy new long-range hunting scope with an electronic turret. And here's how crazy our optics test can be sometimes. They didn't have a model for us to test right away, so they actually shipped it to our testing venue. So we got this box in the very middle of our test, and we kind of worked it in as we could, but I've got to spend a lot more time with that this week to really kind of line out what it does and what it doesn't do. But no, I would say the surprising thing with rifle scopes is a lot of refining of traditional talent. So no electronics in them. There's very good glass, very use case reticles. But there's a couple of things that we did this year. We invited this brand new brand to our test. It's called Monstrum. I ran into them at SHOT Show and I'd never heard of them before and was kind of visiting with them. Well, I knew I had heard of that brand somewhere and I just couldn't place it. It's basically Amazon's house brand. And on a per unit level, they sell more rifle scopes than anybody. So we got in a couple $50 rifle scopes that ship with rings for $50. And we were like, let's see how these things compare to kind of the more branded, more familiar family lines and brands in the optics world. So that was one thing that was a little different. And then also on the rifle scope side of things, I know you've been involved in this. We've got two brand new high profile families of rifle scopes. So Vortex has its Viper HD line, and almost on a configuration by configuration, Loophole has its brand new Mark IV HD line. And so one of the things we wanted to do was, for a reader service, let's put these up against each other and have a shootout. Let's kind of evaluate their reticles, their turrets, their optical performance, things like return to zero and turret tracking, and then shootability in a wide range of situations. So that was a super interesting sort of carve out within our main versatile rifle scope test.
Man, I have to ask. I know the story's not out yet and it isn't going to be for a little while, but how did the Amazon rifle scopes do? And who got the edge in the Loophole versus Vortex family shootout? Wow, you're really, if you make me tell you, I will, but I'd rather not. I can tell you though that the Monstrum, the Amazon bestseller, it actually surprised a lot of people. It didn't fall apart. There was a couple of test team members who were like, "Come on, McKean, let's do a destructive test. I should say the other kind of carve out test we did is we shot 4 straight wall cartridge scopes. So rifle scopes that are purpose built for the bullet drop of a straight wall cartridge.
That's cool.
So I brought a 350 Legend. I brought my 450 Bushmaster out, and everybody was like, "Come on, McKean, how much 450 Bushmaster ammo do you have? Let's break the Monstrum," which we didn't do. But we put it through a lot of tests and a lot of kind of hardship. It held its own until I brought it home. This was something that was kind of interesting. So I know you're going to laugh at this, but one of I would say tropes of optics testing has been the freeze-thaw test.
Yes.
And it's something that we did 25 years ago. We put all the scopes in the freezer and we brought them out, and then we as they thawed, we looked to see how the temperature differential in the lenses migrated moisture inside. And sometimes they did 25 years ago, which is a function of poor seals and just generally poor construction. I stopped doing that 18 years ago because we just did not have any failures. One of the really interesting things about the optics industry has been just the general rise of perfection and improvement. So even cheap-ass rifle scopes and binoculars anymore, they just really don't leak. It's the rare one that does. But just for kicks and giggles, I'm I'm going to put the old Monstrums in the freezer. I also put the Redfield contributed a number of scopes this year. Redfield, a real resonant American optic brand. Two generations ago, there were so many Redfield rifle scopes strapped to rifles, old wood-stocked, Savages and Winchester Model 70s. It's a brand that really has been lost to time. Leupold acquired them for a little bit and had for a year or two a line of Redfields, but then they've just disappeared again. Well, now they're the house brand for Academy Sports. And I just thought I want to bring them back to just see how they do. And actually they did pretty well. We had, I think, 4 different rifle scopes in different configurations from Redfield. But I put the Monstroms, the Redfield, and the Bushnell R3, the lowest end of the new Bushnell family, in the freezer and thawed them out. All the scopes except the Bushnell had interior fogging.
Yeah.
Which was a disappointment, frankly. Like, I was hoping that this very lower end rifle scope kind of proved the thesis I just told you about. Like, hey, everything's better with time. But maybe not. So I think I mentioned that because I think that's an important, like, just evaluation. Like, I think they can do okay for a while, but ultimately you're going to end up regretting that $50 rifle scope. It's going to fail when you need it. It's going to fall apart. It's not going to track. It's going to fog up. So I just think that's an important thing for our test to define and point out.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I'm sure everyone at,
Did you notice though, Alex?
Oh, I noticed. I'm getting to it. I was just going to say, I'm sure everyone at Bushnell is just breathing a sigh of relief that the Amazon scope did not survive this freezer test. But come on, give me a little hint on the Leupold Vortex thing. Just a little, if it's going to lead one way or the other.
I could avoid that. Yeah, I mean, I'm Switzerland when it comes to the way I host and kind of coach all the optics through the test. I really truly want them all to do well. And so what I'm going to tell you about the Leupold Vortex sort of shoot off is it had mixed results. In some cases, like the I have to look at it here. We had the 2 to 10 by 42 Vortex Viper HD up against the 2.5 to 10 by 42 Leupold. In that one, we gave the edge to Leupold. But when you came up in magnification and sort of like more purpose-built, what we noticed is, and this is a great generalization, is we felt like there was more sort of usability on the Vortex side of the line. But when it came to like turret controls and precise reticles, Leupold had the edge and like very like purpose-built, like either on the durability side of things or like very use-specific optics. So I think you can kind of generalize that Vortex may be a little bit more of a generalist. This Viper HD is a little bit more of a generalist family. The Leupold Mark IV HD, a little bit more of like a use-specific family. And there's some variations within that. But one of the variations is the Leupold's on average about $400 more per scope than the Vortex. So I think that's an important consideration if you're in the market for one of these and you're trying to base like your buying decision just on price, especially when the talents are so close to each other.
Interesting.
But it was a really cool test to do. In fact, we did some video at the end of it, and Scott, our gear editor, was asking me these very questions. Come on, McKean, what are you going to name it? Honestly, there was so much noise within like the testing. I honestly, even just like under oath on the stand, I couldn't tell you who won.
Well, that's cool. That's also the sign of a good test. No bias going in, and actually no bias coming out either. We'll be right back after the break. Okay, we're about halfway through. Let's talk about the giant red hot elephant in the room. What's going on? What's going on with thermals? What's going on? What's new in the thermal market?
I mean, kind of everything. Like, it is the most energized, I'd say kind of exciting category out there, but it's a mess, which, it's good job security, but and I think it really highlights some of the value of our test. So as far as I can tell, we tested the largest field of thermal sights, which I considered weapon-mounted sights. So whether they're like straight-ahead thermal rifle scopes or clip-ons or reflex sights, we had 13 or 14 thermal scopes in our test. And then on the category of thermal viewers, so these would be like thermal binoculars and binoculars and sort of handheld devices, think we had 8 or 9 of them. And I think one of the interesting things when it comes to our test is we're still evolving this category. We're trying to find ways that we can apply what I talked to you about at the front end of like the repeatable empirical half of our test combined with like the subjective, how does it feel side of our test. And so we're still really building that up when it comes to thermals. I do have to say, like, man, thermals are literally exhausting. And I'll just give you a little bit of like a flavor of our day. So consider that we spent 5 days testing thermals. We'd wake up in the morning, get a cup of grog in us, have kind of a working breakfast while we kind of framed up our day. Here's what we're going to do today. Because we, as sort of the captain of this thing, you got to keep people moving and kind of keep them on task. I mentioned this is a bunch of opinionated buddies of mine, and sometimes it's hard to crack the whip.
Yeah.
So, but we start pretty hard. We start before there's a lot of like, this is July in Montana and it's been hot. Before there's honestly a lot of like mirage and distortion, we try to use the cool of the morning to really do a lot of like precise optical assessments with things. Then we would move to the range and we would shoot all day. A couple of years ago, we moved all of our scope testing to precision 22s. We used to do like F-class 308s and like and big center fires. And the amount of shooting that we have to do just for a single rifle scope to really tease out its merits, it's like exhausting when it comes to shooting. What we realized is we can shoot twice as much and 3 times as effectively if we go to 22s, all suppressed 22s.
Nice.
Silencer Central fixed us all up with suppressors this year. And it was just a really nice way to get a lot of shooting in, to spend a lot of time behind reticles and on turrets. So we spend all day shooting. We come back to our ranch house just in time to do a low light test. This is our twilight test where we look at all of our optics through the dropping of light in the evening. Well, now guess what we have? Now we got thermals. And so we'd kind of regroup, everybody would chug a Monster energy drink, and we would head out with our thermals. These are long, exhausting days. And so I will allow that we didn't test all the thermals with the same way. We just couldn't. It was messy. And a lot of that is because, I think this is an important consideration for anybody who's buying thermals too. You can go to a sporting goods store, you can mail order a daylight optic, you can strap it on a gun or put it in a chest harness and you're good to go. Thermals have so much more sort of noise. You got to download an app. A lot of times they have proprietary batteries that are drained. So you got to find SD cards for a lot of these things. So there's just a lot of like clutter that you've got to resolve before you can actually go to test one. And we had so many, people were misplacing batteries and chargers. And so it was so we basically high graded thermals at our test. We probably took half the field and out into the field to test. The other half, well, that's what I'm doing this week and next week. And I'm farming out a bunch of them to buddies here in my hometown that are kind of thermal natives. And so again, this test just doesn't end. But that's okay because we're getting so many data points on it.
Yeah. Of the high graded half that you did really test, what stood out just in terms of individual products, but also just in terms of trend of where this thermal market is going and how they're evolving or maybe not evolving?
Yeah. I think that's a really fair way to put it because there is some real like noticeable evolution, but I also feel like we are in a place within the growth of this industry that's a slight bit frozen right now. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. We did a story here a couple of months ago about the State Department sanctions on one of the companies in the thermal industry that supplies the thermal cores to a lot of their competitors. And so, one of the trends we noticed years and years ago with optics, especially Asian sourced daylight optics, is a lot of them were made in the same factories and on the same like assembly lines, but they were just being labeled by different brands who weren't not making them themselves, but they were relabeling ones that they were sort of buying on the open market. The same thing's happening in the thermal industry, which is one reason that I think you're seeing this frozen moment in time. I think there's some real unavailability of these thermal cores with some of the big players kind of reassessing their business models. But the other side of it is these are really expensive. And we'll talk a little bit more about the expense of these in a second. And so once you've got a product line, you want to sell that out before you reinvest in another product line. And so the pace of innovation right now is a little bit slow. I think what we're seeing is market saturation with lots of brands coming to the market. But a lot of these brands have essentially the same product, just a different kind of name and maybe slightly different like ergonomics or button placements. But the core of these things is in some cases literally identical. But so that's one trend, is sort of this like cloning and sameness of the thermal market. The second one, though, is you are starting to see some like escape velocity of these brands that are truly evolving. And there's two products I want to actually mention that are noteworthy because what they're doing is coming to market with like much higher resolution, just much better imaging systems within their products. To give you a baseline, the standard thermal sensor resolution is 640 by 480 resolution. There's a whole like way of assessing that with like microns is the unit of measurement there. But just remember that 640 by 480, and that's, that's a rectangle. And I would say 90% of the thermals in our test have that resolution in their sensor. Some companies have kind of gotten away by upping that by having a high resolution display. So a thermal works by having a thermal sensor that basically looks at temperature variation and turns that into a digital image. And then the display takes that thermal image and makes it viewable to the human eye. This is complicated, but I think it's really important to know. So a lot of companies will still use that same 640 by 480 thermal sensor, but they'll double the display resolution. So it looks bigger, but what they're really doing is just they're magnifying the same base resolution. And we're starting to see that this year with some that, wow, that's a great looking image, but then you look at it under magnification and it still pixelates and it's still kind of a disappointing, smudgy image. But two scopes this year, it's the infrared bolt. This is crazy. The TX60C and Pulsar's Thermion 2 LRF, which stands for Laser Rangefinder, XL50. And I know it sounds like I'm describing like Battlestar Galactica starships. I still haven't gotten my head around the whole like naming convention of thermals. They have truly like high resolution sensors. So their sensors are 1024 by 768. So basically double that traditional sensor and equally resolved displays. What that means to an end user is you look at the world through them and it's just astonishing the detail you can see. I mean, you can see capillaries in people's ears and skin. You can see, for us, we saw, it was still hard to say what it was. It was either a grizzly bear or a moose or a big bull elk at about 4 miles across the landscape up against a reef of the Rocky Mountain front. That is incredible, just resolution, and just to see an image at that distance in terms of like image detection is one thing, but then as you get closer and closer to really see the detail and the image recognition and the target ID is pretty amazing. I think you're going to see that level of like innovation and evolution with resolution become a much bigger thing. You're also going to pay for it. So these higher end thermal scopes with that high resolution are closing in on $8,000. They are pricey devils. Yeah. And so, you asked another question about like trends. And I think a lot of people have been waiting on the sidelines for thermals to become more affordable. They're interested in the product category. They're intrigued and they're infatuated. They want to know more about it. But the average price, I was just looking at this for the thermal sights and scopes in our test, was about $4,500. That's the average price. On the thermal, like monocle or monocular and handheld viewer side, was about $2,500. I mean, these are still really high barriers to entry.
Yeah. And we should point out really quickly that if you're, for hunting purposes, if you are looking at these optics for hunting, you really do need a handheld and also a weapon mounted optic. Like you can't just have one on your rifle, because if you do, then whatever you want to see, you're sweeping with your rifle, and that's that's not safe in the daytime or at night. So for hunting purposes, you really do need 2 of them.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So, if you're talking about getting fully like kitted out with thermals, you're talking over $10,000 for like consumer grade thermals, and obviously a lot more if you want to go into like the military grade world, but which we don't play in. So there's been a lot of energy, and really a lot of my buddies are asking me like, okay, that's one thing to look at a $5,000 thermal, but tell me about the $1,000 thermals. And it's funny, like we actually had very, very few in our tests, largely because they're so junky. They're poorly made. They're sort of slapped together. They're glitchy, but just the thermal resolution is smudgy and like obtuse to the degree that like most of my buddies who have them are like, I wish I had just saved my money and invested in a higher resolution, a better one when before I bought this, because the first thing you're trying to do now is upgrade.
Yeah. Is there a bottom threshold where you're like, yeah, you can get a decent thermal optic starting around this price?
I would say, and consider that our test is really looking mostly at new for this year products. So we're kind of high grading. We didn't really look at everything on the market.
Right.
I would probably put your budget at $2,500. And what you're going to get for $2,500, either weapon mounted sight or handheld, is something that's going to last you for years. You're going to be happy with. You're going to learn how to use it. You're going to learn how to sort of fine tune it and get all of sort of the capabilities out of it. And then you're going to want the next one up. And that's just kind of the way it works. It's almost like digital cameras and computers. Like, get one, get to know the capabilities of it, but also have your mind on like constantly upgrading. And actually, interestingly, I was just seeing something from Pulsar. They sent a thermal handheld that was not in our test. It just came, again, delivered at our test, which is not that useful, called the Telos. And it's a shell that you can send to Pulsar, and they will upgrade the guts of it as they have, as you have more money and as they have sort of higher resolution innards. That's not maybe a bad way to stair step your way into a premium thermal.
Yeah. Keeping along these same lines of just kind of buying advice, looking at your whole optics test and the whole field, what's some advice you could share with listeners to consider who are, in the market for buying new optics this year?
Oh man. I'd say a couple of things. One, the optics industry never ceases to amaze me, how it will serve the market and very specific use cases. And so if there's not an optic that narrowly fits what you want it to do, continue to look, shop around. Like it's likely out there at not only the performance level, but also the price point that you're interested in. That's the one thing. Like, yeah, there's a lot of energy in sort of these new and emerging categories, but we're now filling in so many of these existing families and categories that it's becoming very nichified. But I think that really serves us. It serves the customer, the user. The second thing I would say, and this is like not unique to this year's test by any means, is the profit margins in optics are substantial. And so I encourage our listeners to not pay full retail for optics. So one of the things that's interesting is I ask the manufacturers when they submit optics to give me, they always want to give me the MSRP, the manufacturer's suggested retail price. And that's what you're going to see if, you go to their websites. That's important. But what's more important, especially in our world of searchability and people who are really trying to find out what the real value and price, the market value of things are, I ask them to also send their MAP, their minimum advertised price. And some brands have the differential between the MSRP and the MAP sometimes is twofold. Their MSRP is twice what the MAP is. And so I think that's just a really important thing to keep in mind is like, don't be intimidated by MSRP on a manufacturer's site. Really dig and see what that's really going for, what that minimum advertised price is. And sometimes it's going to Optics Planet or, a second tier vendor to find out what that might be. But so that's just one thing, just by being a smart consumer. And the other thing is like, I'm just amazed and constantly amused and sometimes angered by the marketing gimmickry and like terminology when it comes to like these classes of glass, like ED glass and like, oh, that's actually ED is one of the very few that it's called extra low dispersion glass. And so
that one's real.
Fluoride in it. That one's real. It's the only one that's real. Even high transmission HT glass, I would argue, is like not really has a basis. There's really no basis in reality. HD glass, meaningless. Ultra HD glass, doubly meaningless. Substantial definition,
we don't know.
Come on. We have no idea. and neither do they.
Yeah. So what do you do with that? You can't, if these designations aren't real, what are you supposed to do to figure out like quality of glass and optics besides just, of course, reading this test?
Yeah. Well, that's where I would send you first. So a lot of times it's actually not a difference in glass. It's a difference in coatings and the way that optical prescription is built around an optic. But sometimes there are different classes of glass that correspond to the price of that glass and the raw materials and the way it's ground. And actually what I would really like to do is to see, maybe this is something we can do over time, is to do a test of quality of glass. And it's not always what the glass is made of in terms of its silicone or fluorite composition. A lot of times it's the way it's ground. It's the way it's actually made. Typically the shot glass, the German produced shot glass, yes, it's a higher grade of glass, but it's also very carefully ground so that the edges are just as crisp as the middle. But anyway, differentiating those grades of glass is just something that you're going to need. This is my big takeaway, is look through a lot of different competitors within the same sort of category of optic that you're interested in. And you'll start to see them. You'll start to parse them and be a smarter consumer as a result of looking through an awful lot of different products, which is really all we do at our optics test, is we look through an awful lot of them side by side and head to head.
Yeah. I'm curious, along those lines, over the years, doing the low light test, which is, you kind of described it already, but basically as the sun sets and light lowers across the landscape, you stand in a line with all the optics in the test and look at a resolution wheel and, evaluate the optics head to head to head to head and see when they start to wink out in the fading light. And you've done this for years now and have, reviewed countless optics under this process. Is low light performance continually getting better, or have we kind of topped out at a certain point? Or can you say like year to year?
I'd say there's two ways to answer that. I think on a evolutionary standpoint, yes, it's getting better. And it's really has to do with coatings. Coatings are getting more refined. Actually, Leupold led the way with this with their Twilight. I don't know if you recall when they came out with their Twilight, enhanced coatings.
Okay.
And that is actually something that we could measure in our optics test. They did better in low light conditions. They didn't always do better in direct sunlight, but they did better in low light conditions. And so I think other brands have adopted that. So coatings are better. They're more accentuated for low light conditions, but these are very small and very incremental improvements. At some point, we're going to run out of room. It's a 56 millimeter objective can only allow the passage and transmission of so much light, especially when you stack different lens elements within that. Each lens element reduces the amount of light that comes to your eye. It's just physics. It's just optical engineering, and there are limits to that.
Yeah, gotcha. But kind of based on this year, it's possible we haven't reached the very top yet. Could be more higher performance stuff next year.
Well, I think the real trend that we're seeing is who cares? Because the minute you lose your light, just switch on your thermal.
He's joking, folks. He's joking. Check your local regulations in terms of using thermals for hunting. Andrew, thank you for sharing all this. And yeah, we're gonna see your stories come out in the next few weeks. And yeah, just really good information. Interesting for me too to know what's coming in terms of what I have to edit next.
That's right. Well, only thing I would say as the last word is we did have one big omission at our optics test, and that was you. You got to be there next year.
Okay, next year. Thanks, Andrew.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited by Mike Pedersen of 85 Audio. It's hosted by our editor-in-chief, Alex Robinson. And it's produced by me, executive editor Natalie Krebs. You can read Andrew's full story at outdoorlife.com/optics24. That's outdoorlife.com/optics24. Music in this episode was composed and performed by Pierre Locatelli via APM Music.